Hi everyone, Aces up here back again, and this will be part 3 now. Had to think for a moment then, because I do usually record at least at the start of the series. Been recording full hour, level to level, break to break I should say, but then I have been chopping it up into half-hour blocks, just to make it a little bit easier to digest. 1 hour is getting a little bit long. I think actually studies have shown that trying to concentrate on something for that long, sometimes your attention can sort of start to drop off a bit. So I think half hour is a little bit easier to get through. And there is a lot to get through, a lot of interesting spots. And some, well, I mean, there's just so many final tables and that sort of thing coming up that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. And of course, this Session 1, Part 3 that we're up to now, you're hearing this obviously post-session. It's a review, and after Part 4, from that point on, it will all be in real time, all the way through the series. But we are, of course, just starting off with the post-game commentary, just so that I can really just talk a bit more general about the challenge. Of course, if you're just tuning in, 2 months, taking a starting bankroll of $2,000 and building it up, well, trying to build it up to $42,000. That's the target. And this is the very beginning. Just the third part in from the first session, and you can see we've got Ace-4 suited in the top left. It's a $5 tournament, 5K guaranteed. Rebuy and add on those. So this is a decent tourney considering our bankroll. And I think the Ace-4 suited from third position, and it looks like we're 8-handed. I'd say it's a pretty standard open, but definitely the bottom of our range opening from there, close to the suited aces, the raggy suited aces. So I guess a C-bet on that board is probably okay. We've got the player on the button who has, of course, called us pre-flop, so heads up. I fired the C-bet. I think betting and giving up is probably going to be pretty profitable at these buy-ins. Players are probably going to call pretty wide, especially on the button, because they a lot of the time think, well, I'm on the button, so I'm going to play my button. And look at that, he actually had the Jack-9 suited there, so the ace-high got there. You got to love it when that happens, don't you? And that's, I think, what you can really expect to see at these buy-ins. You know, he's just called to try and hit a flop and then played very passively post. And certainly he could have bet turn. You know, the flush got there, we've checked, we look pretty weak. He could definitely fire out a bet, I think, on the turn. And I'd probably make it a bit of a chunky bet. Did I just fold pocket? I tell you what has just happened there. I did just fold pocket nines top right. And you're probably thinking, what are you doing, aces up? Pocket nines? But I tell you why is because it's actually the bubble right now. And this player is actually 3x raised. And we only have M4-ish. There's 2,200 in there, and we have 10K. So, yeah, 4 or 5-ish. And so I think folding there is okay, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Let's talk about the Ace-10 top left here. I don't mind my check. We have opened in early position, and the player has flattered. And so that being the case, I don't think there's a lot of worse hands that are going to give us value. I mean, if he's got pocket eights, is he going to call flop? I mean, he might call one. But what about if he's got King 10 suited? Let's check and give him a chance to bluff. Or potentially maybe we can get value on later streets, you know, because he might think if we check flop, we don't have an ace. I don't really like my river check here. Actually, let me think about it. I don't hate it. I mean, I think we're always good here. And have a look at that, actually. I just couldn't remember that hand at all. but I don't mind my play there. And I mean, what we're really seeing here, and we've got the pocket aces now, top right. It's a nice spot, obviously. That is the $66 buy-in 5K Cyclone on Triple Eight Poker. And so you can see it is hand for hand. So the bubble, that's why I folded the nines before, because we want to get paid, don't we? And the chips that often you accumulate in the bubble there, I mean, if we had have jammed and doubled up, that's not really, I mean, we go from M4.5 to M9. I mean, that's great. It's significant, but it's not as significant as just making the money. You know what I mean? So if you go from M4.5 to 9, I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to win the tournament, right? It doesn't even mean you're going to, final table and that sort of thing. And so essentially it doesn't really change your immediate goal that much, which is making the money. And in this instance, we can just do that by folding. So you've got to think about that, because long term, the min cashes really add up and make a big difference, especially when you bankroll building like this. And especially in this instance where the $66 buy-in, that represents around 3% of our bank, just over 3%. So that's a big buy-in for us. That's going to be our biggest buy-in that we'll be playing. And I won't even be playing that every day. For now, I don't want to say what's going to happen in the future as the bankroll builds. Who knows? We could start playing 100 rebuys and stuff, but you're going to find out a bit down the track about that. Unless you snuck ahead, of course, and jumped ahead and started watching the later episodes. But for now, we're just trying to build up. And these stages that we're in now, that one, top right, you say, how come you took that one and not the nines before? And I mean, that just looked like a very obvious, he's stealing, trying to put pressure on in the bubble. And I mean, we had a good hand for it, a very good hand for a heads up situation. And we could apply a bit of pressure in our own right there, because we've built our stack up a little bit. So we could apply a bit of pressure to him as well. I mean, he doesn't want to go down to a 5K stack or whatever if he loses that pot and maybe be the bubble boy. And so I think that one was a little bit clearer than the pocket nines, where we had very little fold equity was the main thing with the pocket nines before. Of course, I'm still talking about that top right, just in case anyone's lost the cyclone. We had nines before, and I didn't 3-bet jam it because it was the bubble, and we looked like we had no fold equity, which is the real issue, because that means there's going to be a chance that we bust if our opponent's always calling. But just now, when I jammed the pocket sixes, obviously our opponent folded, which is great. We don't mind. Happy to pick up the dead money, no risk, and make the money. Now, just going back to what I was, top left, we saw some interesting hands before. The ace-4 against the jack-9 suited, and then we saw ace-10 against pocket sevens. Those plays, I think, are what you see at the low buy-ins all the time. It just didn't make any sense the way those guys played it. We actually kind of saw two ends of the spectrum there for the recreational players, I think, these weaker opponents at the low buy-ins. The Jack-9 guy was the passive type, where he just calls and then doesn't even take a stab at it, even though we gave him the green light to bluff by checking and checking on scare cards. He just gave up, and that was it. Very easy, for us. And then, because the ace-high was good. And then kind of the opposite was now you get the aggressive player where, okay, he's checked on an ace-high board. I've only got sevens, but I'm going to pot it. I'm just going to full pot it. And again, he's not really thinking, I don't think there's too much need for the full pot. And then check, check, turn, and now all of a sudden he decides he's going to pot river again. Well, it didn't really add up, did it? If he had an ace, wouldn't he bet turn? And if he had a flush, maybe he would bet turn. And that sort of thing, because a flush did get on a river. So I've got the king 8 suited. It's all about hand reading, really, isn't it? And that's what I'm saying at these lower buy-ins. These players just don't hand read well and make a lot of mistakes, a lot of fundamental mistakes. So I decided to call there, and I would have preferred a little raise, to be honest, just to get the isolation. I think that I've thought that by flatting, the big blind's going to probably... The all-in was just enough that I expect probably the big blind to fold frequently enough. But I think I should have just put in a little raise just to confirm that we do get heads up with the short stack who jammed all in. a little bit of value on the end, and the short stack actually got us with the old Queen 8. But you can see they were short, so they were jamming with a wide range. And that's why, even though we had a marginal hand, what was it, King 8 of hearts we had, right? Even with a marginal hand like that, we actually had them dominated. And so that's why, because short stacks, when they go all in like that, often have wide ranges because they're desperate. They need to take a stand. We can capitalize on that. Even with a hand like King 8 suited, we're getting good pot odds because, you know, they're relatively short, the all-in player, and we've got the blinds and antes, which are fairly considerable. And you can always kind of think about it as, well, if it had folded around to us, we would have raised King 8 anyway. But now we've just got this short stack who's just who was all in, who has sweetened the pot a little bit. And so it's a good play, I think, to isolate there and try and accumulate chips, especially at this stage of the tournament. You can see top right is no longer hand-for-hand play. Okay, so the bubble has burst up there. It's really a fine line in the bubble when you don't have a lot of chips between trying to accumulate but not busting. If you've got the chips, of course, you can put pressure on people. You can play more aggressively, especially the medium to shorter stacks that don't want to bust. The shorter stacks especially. And this stage now that the bubble has burst though, and you know, as for these other tournaments, well, you can see bottom left, it's an easy all-in because we only have under M2. So you can see I've just done a quick check just to make sure there's, no bubble coming up or anything, which is always a good idea. But the blinds are only 400, 800, so it didn't seem like that would be the case. But just a quick check to see what's going on in terms of the stage of the tournament is always a good idea just before you commit. And I've got to admit, I'm guilty of sometimes not even knowing a tournament is in the bubble. When you're multi-tabling, sometimes it's hard to keep up. And it is important, though, as I mentioned. So you need to be... We need to be always in tune with the stage of the tournament if we're going to be playing optimally this series. So one of the parts of the game, one of the skills of the game that I'll have to make sure I keep my eye on. But as far as setting ourselves up for the win at this stage of the tournament now that we're in, we really want to start setting ourselves up for the win. We want to start, especially top left, we've got chips, and bottom right, we've got chips. We want to maintain the aggression. It's really going to come from, I guess, 3 or 4 weapons that we have available. You can see I'm thinking top right here. M5. 35 would be the normal power number required, and pocket 5s are 44, so I like my jam. But also another important thing is that the big blind is sitting out. Now, sometimes they might just suddenly pop back in, but for the time being, we can see they're sitting out, so you can kind of reduce a player there. The other thing is, too, that the player who's thinking now, and the player before him, Monkey Mayhem, and this guy thinking now, FCZ Pitter, these guys are very short. So that sort of has an effect on your jamming range as well. I mean, you can jam a little bit wider because we're pretty short, so they do put a little bit of a dint in our stack. But, effectively, they're going to probably be committing a little bit with weaker hands, and because they're so short, and even if they do call and we take a hit, it doesn't wipe us out. So just weighing in all these things behind, looking at the player's stack sizes behind is really important when you have that sort of push or fold situation. You heard me mention the power number. Of course, I'm referring to quite a common push or fold system. Some of you out there there's usually 3 systems people use. There's the Genevieve, which is basically from each position, based on what stack size you have, what hands you can be pushing. Almost like a list of hands. So you might be from the hijack. So, you got 4 players behind and you're M5, let's say. You have a look at your hands and, okay, ace 7 suited, I can go all in and so forth. What's a much better system than that, of course, is power numbers that we teach at Poker Nerve. But we didn't invent it. Lee Nelson is probably the one that first documents power numbers well in his book, Kill Everyone. Highly recommended. It's a very effective jam or fold system. That's the second system. And the third system, of course, is, you might have, if you've seen Star Wars, the third system is using the Force. And I think there's actually still probably a lot of players out there that still use the Force when it comes to jamming. You know, they just close their eyes and just think, queens, sevens, suited, I'm all in, without really having a proper system in place. And you want to try to avoid that. Thankfully, in this bankroll building series, we're not going to be playing many turbos, and I don't plan on getting short, so we're just going to maintain a big stack. That's what you can do if you make a mistake when you're short. If one of your friends ever says to you, well, how did you go all in with that? Like, that's a pretty bad jam with a short stack. Just say, look, I really very rarely have a short stack. I'm usually chip leader, so I didn't really know about the jam ranges. That's always an excuse you can pull out, but that sounds a bit cocky though. But yeah, you guys can think of an excuse, but there really shouldn't be any excuses because we do have these systems widely available, and it's important to be able to play the short stack well because, well, I mean, it's just one of those parts where the decision should be a lot, simplified, isn't it? It's not like you're facing a triple barrel bluff on the river and you've got a lot of information to work with. Where a guy's fired at you, raised from early, and then you will try and work out his opening frequency and his c-betting frequency, and does he c-bet on that board texture, and then he barrels, and then he jams river, and you're working out pot odds. If it's short stack, it's just, okay, I've got this, do I want to go all in? And that should be that's the simple part of the game, so you want to try and make sure you get that squared away. Does anyone use that term, squared away? I got it from the army. I was in the Australian army for a period. And they used to use that all the time. Get your things squared away, or kind of cleaned up and organized, in other words. For those of you that don't use squared away, I don't even know if that's a commonly used term. Probably some Canadians or Germans or someone English people just thinking, yeah, aces up, you are on another planet. But you can start using that squared away. So what was I going to say? Something. What do I want to talk about? Something else I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I think maybe that's all good. Yeah, I think make sure you're asking lots of questions, guys, in the comments. Always love to hear questions. Easy ones, but no, any questions, but I just prefer the easy ones. And in terms of buy-ins, you can see we've got the $11, as I mentioned before, the 66 top right, $5 rebuy top left, and the $4 rebuy bottom left. And this is the sort of thing that you can expect to see in this series in these early stages until we do build the bankroll. You can, 66 is a big buy-in. You won't see. I mean, that's pushing it. We can take shots where sometimes we might spend, 3, 4, 5% of our bankroll, but we get a couple of shots a week where we can do that. Is what I've agreed to. But generally, I mean, this $4 and $5 rebuy and that sort of thing are nice because the pools are decent, and the rebuy means that the stacks are usually deeper. That's what I wanted to say. I just remembered too about the stacks. Yeah, just try and play when you are bankroll building. I mean, what we've got open right now is probably a typical sort of, and a really good, I think, mix of tournaments. So $4 rebuy, $5 rebuy, $11 2 rebuy, 1 add-on. These are all tournaments that we're going to be, you can have deep stacks in. You get deep stacked. A lot of the times you can pick up chips in the rebuy period. And as for the 2 rebuy 1 add-on, which is the PokerStars tournament bottom right, if you're ever not sure about the tournaments, you can see it on the tournament window just along that top grey bar. Hopefully you guys can see that. If you're at the airport waiting to get on a plane and watching this on a mobile, well, it's probably quite small, but anyway, yeah, that's where the information about the tournament is. You guys know that stuff, yeah, it is just really important to be playing deep stack because the skill edge is just that much greater. It really is. Turbos, as I said before, situations are simplified. So there's just less room for players to make mistakes. And most players these days, jam pretty accurately, I feel. So deep stack is the way to go. The bottom right here, we've got the ace 8, and there is 3,700 in there. So we've got reasonable depth of stack. You noticed I took a slight pause. I'm pretty sure I was just giving myself a few seconds to think about what I would do if these stacks behind jammed. And I think I would probably call. We've got hands 1819 and we've got skills 08. Now this is a very interesting situation where we get 3-bet by a Japanese player here, Masaki K86, and he normally stays out of my way. And I give him credit here. I think he's made it a very small 3-bet size, and he does normally get out of my way. And I think I'm going to fold, but you can see that I'm toying with the idea of the old 4-bet here. And top left, the king-queen. And pretty standard stuff there so far. And so I did fold bottom right there. Now, the reason why I said that situation was so interesting is because the big blind was very short, so when Masaki K raises us, when he 3-bets our steal, he's essentially obviously committed to the big blind. I really find that an interesting dynamic in poker, the way players view that. I think these days a lot of players will, and what I like to do is have a hand that at least has a little bit of value. I mean, you don't want to be really doing it with 8-3 off. But if the big blind is really tight, and then busto there, and then if the big blind is really tight, maybe it will show a profit, and in the players stealing, as we would be there quite wide, then maybe you can extend your range. But what I normally do is like to have a hand that at least has some value, just in case you do find yourself committed to a short stack. Ace-king here, obviously hoping for a jam, but didn't get it. Yeah, so I always find that quite an interesting dynamic. Masaki K there, if he's 3-bet us with, Jack 7 off, and then the big blind jams and he has to call, it's kind of a little bit ugly. But, if he's got King 10 or pocket 3s or something, it's not so bad, is it? Because he's going to have pretty good equity and the pot odds are going to be pretty big by that point. And so I think that's normally what sort of players do, is perhaps not 3-bet with too much trashy stuff. I mean, players generally don't do that anyway. But I think they will still have sort of a widening 3-bet range, a widening group. And yeah, I mean, in that instance, his 3-bet was very small, so it was kind of suspicious. And that's another thing that I think I probably don't do enough, is try and really interpret players' bet sizes. I mean, in terms of tells, I don't know if you would call it a tell, and we're talking about online. So anytime you talk about tells, it's kind of you have to question the relevancy. But we're not talking about looking at someone's, trying to pick up a tell in the traditional sense. Of course, we're talking about in the virtual world, and we have things like timing tells. But I do think timing tells can give you some information, but you've got to be a little bit careful, just like you do with any tell, that you sort of understand what it means. Because some players will snap jam river as a bluff, but some players will just snap jam with the nuts. Other players will tank jam with the nuts. Other players will tank and then decide, maybe, obviously, easy all in here with tens. Hopefully get called by the short stake who thinks we're just trying to put him under pressure. Some players will actually tank, on purpose and then jam with the nuts. And so, but some players are actually thinking. I think that's probably the biggest tell, is when a beginner tanks for ages. Maybe, bet turn at a fairly normal speed, and then the river didn't change anything, and now they just tank for ages, and then jam or make a big bet. I think that's probably the biggest tell that beginners have, and that's usually a very strong hand, and they're just trying to pretend like they're thinking if they can bluff, trying to look weaker, and sometimes it's a dead giveaway. But one thing that I do try to work on is, or at least recently, has been trying to look at the bet sizing. I think that that's probably some information that I'm missing that I could use. So top left, an M8 jams. So if it had a folded to us, that would have been too deep to call, so we would have folded. And you can see that he does have the pocket tens, and if only we had not even a time machine, but just a time telescope, just to see just a little bit into the future, just to see 5 seconds ahead. It's turn that the ace hit, so 10 seconds maybe, and then we could have called and won a huge pot. But so bottom right, this is what I was talking about before, is we just can't really fold to this sort of stack depth unless we're using our time telescope again. And look at that, we had a full house, and if someone said to you, this is going to be the board, do you want to bet your house and cars and your wife, you would have said yes. And then you would have, shock horror, run into the only hand that beats you, quads. And it would have been a sad loss, losing the house and the cars anyway. But, but yeah, I'm really looking forward. It's a little bit slow at the moment, isn't it, with the hand selection that we're getting, but I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing some big key decisions. So bottom right, I think I like an open here. We can call off against hands on our left. We can call against the big blind. And I did fold. I'm kind of surprised, but it doesn't surprise me too much, because in this series, I think I start off, as I said last part, I do start off kind of a little bit tight and a little bit, my radar is off, because I was just coming back from a break and hadn't been doing any recording either, obviously, at that point, and all of a sudden I was playing poker again and recording and playing low buy-ins, which I don't usually play down this low, but yeah, my radar was a little bit off, and I do make a couple of mistakes not big mistakes, but I do make some mistakes this session, and I think from the early sessions in this series, Ace King again top left, couldn't get any action there. Ace 6 now, I think we're better off folding that one. But yeah, it does take me a little while to gain some traction in this series. I mean, we still get some scores and final tables, but I do find that my game is not quite A. It's kind of a B-ish game. I think the main thing is that I feel like I just overestimate my opponents a little bit, and then time and time again we just see them do some really wacky stuff, and so I think that adjustment takes a little bit of getting used to for me. And I had this conversation with someone recently about it's hard at the low stakes because you don't know what players are thinking, so it's kind of a mixed bag, very random, and as ridiculous as that statement is, well, it's fairly ridiculous because, I mean, they're just worse players. So anytime you're playing someone not as good at poker is better for you, right? But that being said, I do think that it takes me a little bit of time to actually adjust and get into my opponent's minds, their psyche a little bit, because that's one thing I kind of pride myself on, is being able to get in my opponent's minds and metagame and mixing things up a bit and changing gears. I think is probably my strong points. Is I can play very aggressive, or I can kind of tighten up, depending on the stage of the tournament. And well, King Jack suited top left and no action. And now we have the pocket rockets on the bottom right.